welcome to Database Security Office Hours for June 2021. This month's topic is Audit Vault and Database Firewall. We just released Update 4, so version 20.4 last week, and wanted to walk you through what's new in it. For announcements this month, this is the big announcement of the month, a new version of Audit Vault and Database Firewall with a ton of new features. So let's get right into today's technical session. Audit Vault and Database Firewall, version 20.4, released on the 28th of May. You have both the full install, which you can pick up from edelivery.oracle.com, the upgrade patch, if you've got an existing install you want to upgrade. The OCI Marketplace image for Audit Vault has been updated to 20.4, and for Live Labs, we are on 20.3 right now. We do not currently plan to upgrade to 20.4. That may change as time goes on, but we just got the Live Labs 20.3 image out, and so we will probably skip 20.4 and go to 20.3. Okay. There is a ton of stuff new in this latest release, and we're going to hit all of these as we go through. But and here I'm even cherry picking because there are a few other new features that just, there was only so much time we could go through today. So let's dig right into it. For targets, we've updated, as we always do with every new release of Audit Vault and Database Firewall, the target list. So we support Database 21C, which should be released for on-premises use later this year. We support audit collection from autonomous data warehouse and transaction processing on dedicated servers. We've updated to the latest release of MongoDB, so we support up to Mongo 4.4 now. And we've updated our Linux operating support to 7.9, 8.2, and 8.3 for both Oracle Linux and Red Hat Linux. A kind of an important change, especially for those of you that are working with government agencies or any of the Department of Defense agencies, is Audit Vault and Database Firewall can now be shifted into FIPS 140-2 mode, which will change how encryption works, both for data at rest and data in motion. When you switch to FIPS mode on the Audit Vault server, you are switching both the operating system and the embedded database into FIPS mode. On the Database Firewall, there is no database, so you're only switching the operating system. One little thing to look out for. As we made this change, FIPS has certain requirements around key length. And so if you are using SSH keys to log in to your Audit Vault or Database Firewall server, you will find that those keys will not work unless they are one of the key types you see listed here. So for myself, for example, I do SSH key for almost everything, and I was using SSH-RSA keys, the default, and I had to go out and update my keys to the ED 25519 version in order to continue using SSH keys for Audit Vault and Database Firewall. So again, FIPS 140 support now available in 20.4. Also in 20.4, we have made a change to the agent collection. So as you configure a collector for Audit Vault and Database Firewall, in previous versions up through 20.3, you would find that you would start to hit limits at around 1,000 records per second. You would have trouble with the agent keeping up, and that was because each collector was a single-threaded entity. In 20.4, we have a new attribute, av.collectorframework.multi_threaded, that if set to true, will allow multiple threads to be used on a collector, getting up to 2,000 records per second, or 172 million records per day. Now, this is not something most of you are going to hit. If you have a single target on a single audit trail that is generating more than 86 million audit records per day, you may want to take a look at your audit policies and see if you can fine-tune those. But if you truly do need to bring in that kind of volume, we're now benchmarking at around 172 million records per day. Do keep in mind that setting this parameter increases the load of the Audit Vault agent on the database server because it's collecting more audit records. It's using more CPU resources. We're working on updating the sizing worksheet now, but if you do set this, if you're truly generating that many records per day, if you set this, expect the agent to pull another thread, which will use more CPU. All right, next thing that's new in 20.4. Many of you are using before and after value collection, and you may remember that when we moved from Audit Vault and Database Firewall version 12 to version 20, we changed our collection mechanism. So this is not new in 20.4. This is how things work throughout 20. And what we do in Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20 is instead of using streams, which we've been using, all the way back to Audit Vault version 10, we switched to using GoldenGate. There were a lot of advantages in GoldenGate over streams, but here's kind of how that process works. Someone makes a data change, insert, update, delete on the target database. That generates redo. GoldenGate mines the redo and then produces an XML trail file. This XML trail file is specialized for Audit Vault. The Audit Vault agent has a collector that reads those XML files and dumps that information into the Audit Vault server where it can produce your before and after values report. So this is how it's been working. Now, the challenge for those of you who are doing this in 20.1, 20.2, 20.3 is those XML files, they sit out there on the operating system and you had to manually delete them. In 20.4, we now allow a managed deletion of those trail files. So what we've got is a new utility called the Oracle GoldenGate Extract Cleanup Handler. And this cleanup handler will take a look at the agent logs and will determine the timestamp of the last processed trail file. And when you run this utility, it will delete all files where the current timestamp is older than the last processed trail file. So it will remove your older files for you. Now this isn't just something you set and forget. This is a job you need to run periodically. We recommend you run it weekly, daily, maybe even monthly. You don't want to run it every hour, every half hour, unless you're extremely constrained in storage space, because you do want to leave time for the GoldenGate collector to go out and pick everything up. But when you run this job, it will automatically get rid of everything that's already been processed by the collector and free up your disk space for you. There's a couple of things to remember before you set this up. This is all based on timestamps. And so you want to make sure that the server where you are running the agent, it has its time zone set to the same time zone as your database server. We want the timestamps to match. And when you configure your secured target on the Audit Vault server, you also want to make sure that you set the time zone offset for this secured target to where it matches the correct timestamp. So all of these things have to be in sync for this process to work properly. But just a great new addition, makes it a whole lot easier to work with before and after value collection. Next thing we want to talk about, I'd mentioned earlier, if you were generating more than 86 million audit records per day, you might want to fine-tune your audit policies. Well, we have made some of that fine-tuning easier with Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20.4. If you go into your policy screen in the Auditor console, you will now see that when it comes time to provision a policy, there's a little pencil icon. I missed this the first time I reviewed the UI, but there's a new pencil icon, which if you click it, pops up the window you see on the right here, where you can choose, is this policy going to be applicable to all users or only a specific group of users or roles? And is it going to be applicable when successful or not successful? So some of the things that you've always been able to do when you enabled policy command line on a database, you can now do through Audit Vault and Database Firewall. Really flexible, easy to use UI. I think they did a great job on this, and I particularly like that even after it's done, you have a really clear indication of what's a user and what's a role. So just kind of keep that in mind there. But we didn't just update the UI. We know a lot of you script things for automation with the AVCLI, and so we have also enhanced the enable audit policy commands on AVCLI for users and for roles, when successful, when not successful. So you've got those capabilities there. Speaking of enhancing the Audit Vault command line interface, we have added in new commands which allow better management of Audit Vault and Database Firewall console users. So you can now, especially around auditor, you could do most of the things for the admin and super admin before, but now you can grant and revoke auditor and super auditor. You can list who your auditors are, all of the auditors, or if you say to list an individual auditor, so list auditor, auditor name, you'll get back all of the details on that particular user for the console. So both from the console and command line, you have more ability now to control your Audit Vault and Database Firewall users. Let's move to the firewall because we made some big changes in policies. And one of the most interesting changes is that we now allow profiles to be applied to object rules. For those of you who aren't using profiles, let me just define a couple of terms yet. A set in Database Firewall is a collection of values that describes IP addresses, database users, operating system users, or client programs. So it might be a list of the IP addresses that your application servers are running on, or it might be a list of the database users that your application uses to connect to the database, or the operating system users that your database or that your application is using. You can combine sets together into profiles. So what you see on screen now is I had a set called application IPs, and it only had one value in it because I only have one app server in my environment, but that was 10.0.0.150. I also had a set of database users, of OS users and client programs, and I combined all of those together into a profile called the application profile. Now, the purpose of this profile is to describe to Database Firewall what a connection from the application looks like. What's new in 20.4, because this is there in earlier versions, is that I can now apply these profiles at the database object level. Prior to this, profiles could be applied only at the session context level in your rules or at the SQL command level in your rules, but now it goes all the way down to database objects. If you remember what was new in 20.3 for database object rules, which was that we could now begin to collect number of rows that had been selected, you can see why having this profile capability is so important. So what's kind of funny is if you look at the evolution of Database Firewall, going all the way back to Database Firewall 5 through the Audit Vault and Database Firewall 12 series and now up to AVDF 20.4, database object rules, which hardly used to ever be used, most people just worked with session context rules and SQL rules. Database object rules are now becoming probably one of the most common things that we see used in firewall policies. So here what you get is on the left-hand side an example of an object rule that is configured for the tables that contain sensitive data, and I have a profile included. And on the right-hand side, you can see I've got another rule, exact same table, but notice that the threat severity is different. I should have put little boxes around those. But the rule on the left, the threat severity is minimal. The rule on the right, the threat severity is moderate. Okay? This becomes important in the next screen here. Okay, so in one I'm using a profile, in the other I'm not using a profile. Another change that we made to Database Firewall is that you can now, from the user interface, go through and easily change the order in which rules are evaluated. So if I want to evaluate that rule that said for application tables make my severity minimal, and if something is coming through any other way, make it moderate, I can do that. I can say check the applications table rule first, check the bypass rule second. And that way I don't accidentally have one rule that encompasses a different rule. If I had this order reversed, by the way, let me go back one screen. If I'd had this order reversed to where the bypass rule was configured first, then the applications table rule, the non-bypass rule, would never be evaluated because the bypass rule would, anything that's coming in, since I'm not using profile, would have been satisfied by the bypass rule. So again, the ability within a database object rule to use profiles, big thing, and the ability within all of the rules now to set your evaluation order. Really important new feature in Database Firewall 20.4. Next new feature I want to talk to you about is really an interesting one. Audit Vault and Database Firewall is most commonly thought of as a way to do database auditing and bring in records from databases into audit records from databases into a repository for analysis, alerting, and reporting. But Audit Vault and Database Firewall is actually a really good general purpose audit repository and audit reporting tool that can work with almost any database and in fact almost anything that produces an audit trail. If you want to bring in a custom target, something that we didn't already plan for, you have to have some way to translate its audit records into a format that Audit Vault and Database Firewall can ingest, and we do that with custom collectors. Prior to Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20.4, we allowed you to bring in audit records that were stored in a database table or in an XML file, and we've done those for a very, very long time. When we released version 20.1 last year, we added to that anything that produces its audit record in a JSON document or exposes it to a RESTful API. In this latest version, in 20.4, we now kind of round out that custom collector framework by allowing you to easily bring in anything that produces its audit records as a comma-separated value file. So if you look across that, database table, XML, JSON, CSV, and REST API, that covers just about any type of audit trail you're likely to run into. To use this new CSV file capability, it's really no different than using the other technology connectors. You're first going to create a mapper file, and the mapper file describes the CSV columns and how they map to the Audit Vault and Database Firewall repository. What columns go into what elements from the CSV file go into what columns. Next, you'll create a plugin manifest that just describes the target, what the versions are, what the mapping is going to look like. And finally, you'll package that mapper and manifest together to create the plugin. Then all you have to do is deploy the plugin and create your new target and audit trail. So very, very easy to do this. The other thing that is new in 20.4 is, of course, we have updated the marketplace image. When you go to the marketplace image, you will now see that it defaults to the Audit Vault server for 20.4. We do still have 20.3 available for those of you who want to play with the older version. I found this particularly helpful in practicing my upgrades because I was able to quickly provision a 20.3 instance and just go through the upgrade for 20.4 before I did it on my actual server. I do want to point out the usage instructions here. You'll see that circled on my screen. And don't forget what I said at the start. The SSH keys that you use, this includes for the marketplace image, are now constrained by key type. When you click on usage instructions, you will see that same note that I had earlier where we tell you what key types are allowed. If you accidentally skip this and use an older key, then what you will find is you will provision an Audit Vault and Database Firewall image, but you will not be able to log into it to set up your console. So make sure you pay attention to that key usage. And that's it. That's Audit Vault and Database Firewall 20.4, and that finishes out our office hours for June. I hope to see you next month. Our office hours will be on Wednesday, the 14th of July. And right now, what I'm planning for the topic is to review the new target registration procedures for Oracle DataSafe. For those of you that are using DataSafe, if we're on time, you should start to see a new version of target registration roll out. This is a really big change for us, by the way. We're completely redoing the screens for how targets are registered, and we're enabling a lot more automation around target registration that is going to open up just tons of capabilities for us as we move through the summer towards DataSafe this fall. So again, that's it. Hope to see you next month, and thanks everyone for joining.